Also, I forgot to say that the noise needs to be drained in reverb. And let's see what happens. That's really beautiful. Hi and welcome to this video. My name is Janis and this is going to be all about making generative ambient patches with Syntakt, which is incredibly fun and inspiring, and with any type of synth, I always love to set up those patches because it allows you to sit down, to listen to the music and just observe those ongoing changes and modulations. But it's really important to understand that it's not so much about those individual sounds. They are also really basic, as you will see. The most important things are actually understanding the sequencer and the LFOs for applying some random modulations. For creating those generative patches, I always like to start with some melodic ideas. So in this case, on track 11, I used the analog engine and made some slight adjustments to the sound, so you can actually copy them if you feel like. You can see that actually the decay is really short, and I'm only using one oscillator because I don't want to have this big 2 oscillator sound here. The configuration is actually on the default setting. The filter looks like this, so I just brought down the filter and actually adjusted a bit the decay and added some envelope depth. And for the amp, I think the only thing I did was making the release a little longer. Again, you could use any other sound. You don't have to copy this particular setting. As you can see, the tempo is 120, and I also changed the pattern length. By default, it's on 16, and I changed it to 64 to have the maximum amount. And the scale I changed to a half, which means instead of having 4 bars, we have 8 bars to work with, but the highest note value we can use are 8th notes, but that's totally fine because for this type of patch we don't need any 16th notes. But let's move on to the melodic idea, and I really like to change to keyboard mode here. And you can see that it's switched to Aeolian, which is like natural minor, and the keyboard fold is also great because it gives you 2 octaves and you can't play notes that are out of tune. Actually here I reached the highest octave, but it's fine because the high C is the highest note we need. And I was just playing some small arpeggio with like the root note, the minor 3rd, the 5th, then the flat 6th, and also the 7th. And then at some point I changed to the C as the highest note. So it's a little rhythmic idea that we have this group of 5 that actually overlaps the bar line, so also overlaps the counts of the 4/4 bar. I always like to use uneven groups for just making it rhythmically a little more exciting. And then you can, in a tempo that works for you, I mean, if you realize you want to play something but it's too fast, you can always make it slower. If you go to the tempo setting and play the figure in a tempo that suits you and then speed it up later. For me, it works in this tempo, so I'm gonna enable the click. Oh, and some really helpful setting here is the pre-roll bars, because it means that it's going to give us 1 bar pre-count and then we can actually record. So it means that once I enable the recording mode, I wait for 1 bar and then I can play it. I added this tiny variation in the end, so it resolves after those 4 bars. And I think it was really shaky, so I'm going to quantize it. Maybe not with the full amount, just with like 98. If you feel like it's a little too complex with a kind of polyrhythmic idea, you can also just manually create the sequence. If you enter the sequencer mode and then you just draw notes, for example, those 5. And then if you press, for example, the second one down and then change the control for the pitch, you can just change the pitch. So we need to make it G here. The second one was D sharp. This one would be G sharp and this one would be A sharp. And then you have the same sequence. And then there's a great trick, so you don't have to do this for all positions. Once you have a little group, you can actually somehow manage to press down all of them. It's kind of a difficult move to perform. And then you press copy, and then you just select trigger 6 and press paste, and then it's going to paste all those 5 triggers, so that makes it a little easier. Now, for making the sequence a little generative, you simply have to change the probability, and I think I used 30%, so only 30% of all programmed notes are going to be triggered. So that's actually a cool start. And the next thing that is really fun to try is to send it into a delay. And if you go to amp and then increase the value for delay, we kind of fill up those gaps because now we have some space, and it sounds super cool if the delay plays actually in those gaps. And I also want to share with you the delay settings. So this is how it looks like. So it's on quarter notes, a little bit of filtering. And if we send it into the delay, it sounds like this. And since we're making some ambient music, we definitely need some reverb. So under amp, we can also send the sound into reverb. And I always change the reverb to some different settings because by default, it's really short. So these are my preferred settings. I mean, I always modify them, but actually a decay time around 95 plus minus is always great in my opinion. And also increasing the pre-delay because otherwise it just sounds too short. And this is actually some cool ambient reverb. So let's actually listen to it. Now, the final fun for this track comes by playing with the LFO because I love them so much. Let's actually use the first one. There's one particular mode I almost always use, which is the random one. It looks like this. And if you switch this control to hold, it means per trigger, it only sends out one value. So for example, if you apply this to panning, it's under the amp setting. It just gives us a different panning position per trigger. Really beautiful. I decided to not use it for panning here though, because I think I use it for some other instruments or parts. But all those things are so fun. So for example, the filter decay can also be super interesting. Or if you want to try something more experimental, you can change the oscillator configuration. It's basically like changing synthesizers with every trigger. That's actually super cool. Let's keep this one because we have a second LFO where I want to share with you the other modulation I used, which was modulating the filter envelope depth. So we kind of get changes in the way how bright the sound is going to be. And I used the same random LFO on the hold setting. And yeah, if we use the setting, the speed doesn't really matter. We can just increase the depth. By the way, in case you enjoy this video and also feel like supporting this channel, you can quickly hit the like button and be also warmly invited to subscribe because I'm going to post more Syntakt videos in the future. So let's move on to the bass, which is also a very simple setting in terms of sound. So one important thing for the trigger is actually that it's on full length because you could hear that the sound is really long. You can see later I changed the probability, but for recording this part, it's actually make it 100%. The synth settings are pretty straightforward again. I didn't change much. It's dual oscillator sitting on the basic setting. Again, a little bit of overdrive. And the second oscillator is just tuned one octave lower. And for the filter, it looks like this. Again, I usually bring down the filter quite a bit and apply some envelope. It almost always looks like this, but this envelope keeps a little bit of the sustain and has also a very long release. And the amp looks like this. Then you can change to keyboard mode and basically look for some cool bass notes that would fit the sequence we already created. Oh, something went wrong. I think I accidentally hit a wrong note at the beginning of the sequence, but we can always go actually into it. Have to leave keyboard mode. And the first note is supposed to be C, not D, and then it works. And the fun thing about this bass sequence is that once we change the probability to, for example, let's say 70%, it leaves out some notes. And with the bass, this changes so much to the overall flow, because if you stay on a different bass note for a longer time, it doesn't resolve, for example, to a note you expect. So the whole music sounds different. And this is probably my favorite effect for the whole arrangement. So let's actually listen to it. And yeah, all you need to do now is change the probability. And also, it sounds pretty amazing if you send it into the reverb. Not the most common thing to do for bass, but with this sound, it sounds really beautiful. I'll also quantize it quickly. I just find it so enjoyable to listen to it. It's still kind of simple, but I mean, this keeps playing and you have a good time listening to it. Actually, for the bass, I didn't even add any types of modulations. It's just the way it is right now. So let's bring in the noise, because that's also so fun to add this kind of noise layer that shifts a little. Because here we definitely need some modulations. It's on this channel. And actually, this one we can just program manually, because all we need is one note of noise in the beginning, where you have to make sure that it's as long as it can be, infinite, and then we should actually have it already. There's super fun stuff you can do with the LFO modulation, but actually the noise, so it's the UT noise, the analog one. It looks like this. So lots of filtering going on, and also taking away actually quite a lot of stuff here with the pitch envelope in the beginning, or this kind of attack. And the filter also takes away some stuff, looks like this. And the amp probably is still on default setting. I don't think I did anything to the amp. And modulating noise parameters is super fun. Here we don't use, or I didn't use the sample and hold LFO. I actually used a very slow sine wave. I'm still a bit confused sometimes by the speed indications of the LFO, so let's try the slowest setting and choose, it's LFO2, doesn't matter, the synth frequency. Actually, you choose the filter frequency and then see what happens if we increase the depth. And now we have one more LFO left, which we could use for modulating the panning, because with this noise sound, it should sound really cool. Just a sine wave, free running, and actually let's make it slow. Somehow it's a nice amount of slowness for this type of modulation seems to be here with this setting. Also, I forgot to say that the noise needs to be drained in reverb. And let's see what happens. That's really beautiful. Thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in how the Syntakt interacts with other hardware like my Nordstrom 3P, I recommend this video here, where I was actually exploring some DAW-less setup with the two instruments. And also here's a playlist with some more general tips on music production, and soon there will also surely be some more Syntakt content. Apart from that, I wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!